The impossible happened on Thomas Reed's farm last summer, when his generations-old well ran completely dry during the worst drought in recorded history. His desperate decision to keep digging, against all expert advice, uncovered the entrance to an ancient underground civilization that had mastered drought survival 12 centuries ago. What started as a last-ditch effort to save his family's farm from foreclosure ended up rewriting American archaeology textbooks and transforming a dying rural community into an international research hub. The water management system he discovered, built by a sophisticated pre-Columbian society, not only saved his land, but now provides sustainable irrigation for an entire county once condemned to become a dust bowl. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment Thomas Reed's shovel broke through the strange stonework 15 feet below, where his grandfather had stopped digging the family well, he knew he'd found something significant. But not even in his most desperate prayers for water had he imagined discovering an entire civilization hidden beneath his failing farmland. Now, as archaeologists carefully document elaborately carved passageways stretching for miles beneath Clearwater County, the world is confronting a humbling truth. The answer to our modern climate crisis might have been patiently waiting underground, preserved by the very ancestors whose wisdom we've long ignored. Thomas Reed had never considered himself particularly stubborn until the 9th month of the drought. At 45, with premature grey threading through his dark hair and permanent creases around his eyes, from squinting into an unforgiving sun, he had always prided himself on practicality. The 5th-generation steward of Reed family farms wasn't prone to fantasy or desperation. At least, that's what he'd believed until he found himself alone at midnight, lowering himself into an abandoned well shaft that everyone, from the county agricultural extension officer to his own brother, had assured him would yield nothing but wasted effort and possibly a broken neck. The merciless summer had baked Clearwater County into submission. Not a drop of meaningful rain had fallen since early February, leaving the once productive farmland cracked and barren under a relentless sun. Weather forecasters had long abandoned hopeful predictions, now grimly tracking how this mega drought compared to historical records. It had already surpassed the devastating dry spell of 1953, and meteorologists were using phrases like once in 5 centuries with disturbing frequency. Thomas's pickup truck, a faded blue Ford with a perpetual film of dust coating its exterior, sat beside the vintage barn his great-grandfather had raised in 1923. The wooden structure, weathered too, a silvery grey, still stood straight and true, unlike the family's financial situation. The hand-painted Reed Family Farms, Eastern 1887 sign hung slightly crooked at the property entrance, the chain holding its right side having rusted through during last month's dust storm. Thomas hadn't bothered to fix it. With foreclosure looming, the sign's fate seemed as precarious as his own. Inside his kitchen, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light that his late wife Sarah had always hated, Thomas spread out the topographical maps of his 180 acres, while the radio delivered another obituary for a neighboring farm. The tinny voice announced with rehearsed solemnity, Westland Properties confirms the acquisition of the Davidson Ranch, marking their 8th purchase in Clearwater County this season. A spokesperson for the Development Corporation states they remain committed to preserving the agricultural heritage of the region while transitioning the land to more sustainable uses. Thomas switched off the radio with a sharp twist of the dial. Bill Davidson had farmed that land for 37 years. His peach orchards had once been the pride of the county fair. Now, like so many others, his legacy would be bulldozed for whatever sustainable uses Westland had in mind. likely vacation homes for city dwellers seeking weekend countryside charm without the inconvenience of actual agriculture. The bank statement lying open beside the maps told Thomas's story in merciless red numbers: 246,873 in outstanding loans. Before the drought, he'd been steadily paying down the debt he'd taken on to modernize the farm's irrigation systems, an investment that now sat useless as the groundwater levels had dropped below what even his state-of-the-art well could reach. His financial cushion had evaporated faster than the retention pond that now resembled a dusty crater on the back 40 acres. Thomas ran a calloused hand through his hair, dislodging fine dust that had become a constant presence in his life, infiltrating everything from his coffee mugs to his lungs. The county water authority had cut off supplemental irrigation supplies 3 weeks ago, prioritizing residential needs. The small allocation for livestock remained, but Thomas had already sold off most of his cattle at devastating losses. The remaining animals survived on the minimum, their ribs increasingly visible beneath dull hides. The leather-bound journal beneath the financial papers had become Thomas's unlikely focus over the past week. Bound among his father's possessions after his death last winter, the book contained his father's meticulous research into local history, a hobby that had once seemed like a harmless eccentricity, but now held Thomas's desperate attention. His father, Robert Reed, had been a farmer by profession, but a historian by passion, collecting oral histories and frontier accounts about the region's past. One recurring narrative particularly caught Thomas's interest now: references to an ancient people who had supposedly thrived in this region during previous extended droughts, with multiple accounts mentioning waters flowing beneath the earth, where no wells have reached. Most academic historians had dismissed these stories as typical frontier mythology, the kind of embellished tales that settlers and indigenous tribes passed down through generations. But Robert Reed had approached the legends differently, cross-referencing them with geographical anomalies and unexplained archaeological findings in the area. He'd identified several locations on their property where strange depressions or unusual rock formations might indicate something beneath the surface. One such location was the old hand-dug well near the eastern property line, a water source dug by Thomas's great-great-grandfather but sealed off in the 1960s when his grandfather had switched to modern drilling methods. The phone's ring startled Thomas from his contemplation. His brother James's number flashed on the screen. With a sigh, he answered. "Tom, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," James began without greeting. "This idea of reopening Grandpa's old well is pure foolishness. Every hydrologist and drilling company in the county has confirmed the aquifer is depleted. Modern wells going down 300 feet are coming up dry. What do you think you'll find that they haven't?" "Maybe nothing," Thomas admitted, tracing his finger over a notation in his father's journal. But Dad was convinced there was something different about that location. Dad's research was a hobby, Tom," James interrupted, his voice softening with concern. "Look, I know you're desperate to save the farm. We all are. It's our heritage. But Westland's offer is the best you're going to get in this market. With that money, you could relocate, start fresh somewhere with reliable rainfall, maybe up in Oregon." "And be what exactly?" Thomas cut in. "A former farmer? Our family has worked this land for 5 generations, James. I'm not ready to be the one who surrenders it. There's no shame in accepting reality. This drought isn't showing any signs of breaking, and the climate models suggest this is the new normal for our region. You can't farm without water, and all the family tradition in the world won't make rain fall or wells fill." The conversation continued its familiar pattern, James presenting rational arguments for accepting Westland's buyout offer, Thomas resistant but without a convincing counter-argument beyond stubborn attachment to the land. By the time they hung up, Thomas felt the weight of his brother's unspoken judgment that his refusal to sell was emotional selfishness rather than sound judgment. The county agricultural extension office had been equally dismissive the previous week when Thomas inquired about permits to reopen and deepen the old well. The agent, a young woman with a freshly minted degree in hydrogeology and a sympathetic but condescending manner, had patiently explained why his plan made no scientific sense. "Mr. Reed, our geological surveys have mapped the aquifer extensively," she'd said, showing him colorful charts on her tablet. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If there was water down there, the commercial drilling companies would have found it. The bedrock formation beneath your property is solid granite at approximately 320 feet. No water is penetrating that layer in significant amounts." When Thomas had mentioned his father's historical research suggesting otherwise, her smile had tightened with professional patience. Folk traditions about underground rivers are common in agricultural communities worldwide. They represent our ancestors' limited understanding of hydrogeology, not actionable intelligence. I'd strongly recommend you consider the drought-resistant farming alternatives we've outlined, or perhaps explore Westland's transition program for farmers in your situation. The transition program was corporate speak for selling out at 40 cents on the dollar. Thomas had left with the permit application unfiled, his determination hardening despite, or perhaps because of, the universal certainty that his plan was foolish. That night, after reviewing his father's notes once more, Thomas made his decision. Permit or no permit, he would reopen the old well and see for himself what lay beneath. If nothing else, the physical labor would provide a constructive outlet for his frustration while he figured out his next move. The following morning dawned mercilessly bright, the sun already scorching at 6:30 a.m. when Thomas began clearing decades of accumulated soil and debris from around the old well's location. A concrete cap had been poured over the opening when his grandfather switched to machine-drilled wells in the 1960s. Breaking through that barrier took Thomas the better part of the day, the rhythmic swing of the sledgehammer, a meditation of sorts, each impact driving home his isolation and desperation. By sunset, sweat-soaked and exhausted, he had created an opening large enough to lower a flashlight into the shaft. The beam revealed a circular stone lining disappearing into darkness, the craftsmanship of his ancestors still intact after more than a century. No water reflected the light, confirming what everyone had told him: the well was bone dry. Rather than discouraging him, the sight steeled Thomas's resolve. Over the next 3 days, he assembled the equipment he would need: extension ladders, safety harnesses repurposed from his tree-pruning gear, battery-powered lights, and digging tools. He worked primarily in the evenings and early mornings to avoid both the punishing midday heat and the potential discovery of his unauthorized water exploration by county officials making their drought compliance rounds. Word of Thomas's project inevitably spread through the rural community's efficient grapevine. Some neighbors drove by slowly, curiosity warring with concern on their faces. Old Frank Mullen from the adjacent property stopped one evening, watching silently for 20 minutes before offering his perspective. "My granddaddy used to talk about underwater streams that the regular wells couldn't reach," the elderly farmer said, leaning heavily on his walking stick. Said the native folks knew how to find them, had special ways of digging that the white settlers never figured out. He shook his head slowly. Of course, that could just be old-timer talk. You're either going to find water or you're not. And either way, you've got more gumption than sense right now, Tommy Reed. As Thomas descended into the well for the first time, securing his makeshift harness to a sturdy A-frame he'd constructed, over the opening, The old man's words echoed in his mind. Gumption or madness, the line between them seemed increasingly thin as he lowered himself into the narrow shaft, the beam of his headlamp illuminating hand-laid stones placed by his ancestors. Long before mechanical well drilling became commonplace, the well shaft extended 42 feet down, ending in a roughly circular bottom where groundwater had once seeped in from the surrounding soil. Thomas began methodically removing the packed earth, expecting to hit the bedrock that should, according to county geological surveys, be present throughout the region at varying depths. Instead, after removing about 2 feet of compacted soil, his shovel struck something that didn't feel like natural stone. Clearing away more dirt revealed what appeared to be worked masonry, smooth blocks fitted together with precision that couldn't possibly be natural. Thomas's pulse quickened as he carefully exposed more of the strange stonework, his headlamp revealing patterns etched into the material, definitely not random geological formations. That first night, Thomas cleared enough of the mysterious structure to confirm it was deliberately constructed, not some trick of natural formations. He took several photos with his phone before exhaustion and caution compelled him to ascend back to the surface. Despite his fatigue, sleep eluded him as his mind raced with possibilities. Had he discovered some forgotten frontier structure? Perhaps an old root cellar or storage chamber built by early settlers and somehow forgotten? But the craftsmanship looked nothing like 19th century construction methods he was familiar with from historical buildings in the region. The following morning, Thomas made a call that surprised even himself. During his father's historical research, Robert Reed had occasionally corresponded with Professor Sarah Mitchell at the State University's Anthropology Department, one of the few academics who had taken his amateur historical theories seriously. Thomas had met her only once, at his father's funeral, but remembered her as thoughtful and unpretentious, despite her credentials. "Professor Mitchell, this is Thomas Reed, Robert Reed's son." "Oh, Thomas, it's good to hear from you. How are you holding up during this awful drought?" "Struggling like everyone else," he admitted, "but I've found something on my property that I think might interest you. It relates to some of the research my father was doing before he passed." His description of the stonework beneath the well captured her attention immediately. "Those patterns you're describing, could you send me some of the photos?" Thomas forwarded the images while they spoke. Her sharp intake of breath when she opened them was audible even through the phone. "Thomas, if these images are accurate, what you've uncovered shares characteristics with pre-Columbian construction techniques that have never been documented this far north. The iconography, particularly. I need to make some calls. Please don't disturb the site further until I can get back to you." The urgency in her voice left Thomas both concerned and vindicated. Whatever he had discovered, it wasn't just another frontier-era remnant or his imagination running wild. Later that afternoon, his phone rang again. The caller identified himself as Dr. William Chen from the State Historical Preservation Office. "Mr. Reed, we've been reviewing the photos you sent to Professor Mitchell," he said without preamble. "They show what appears to be consistent with pre-Columbian construction techniques. We'd like to send a preliminary assessment team to your property as soon as possible." Thomas's mind flashed to his unsuccessful visits to the county extension office. "I've had local officials out twice to discuss reopening the well," he said cautiously. "They showed no interest in historical aspects and suggested my father's theories about underground water sources were interesting but unscientific." "This would be an entirely different team," Dr. Chen assured him, "from the Federal Archaeological Assessment Division. They specialize in unexpected historical discoveries, particularly those of potential national significance." Something in his carefully measured tone made Thomas pause. "What exactly are they looking for? What do you think I've found?" "Mr. Reed, If your photographs are accurate, and we have no reason to believe they're not, the stonework you've uncovered displays characteristics consistent with sophisticated architectural traditions that aren't documented in this region. The particular style and symbols suggest a connection to civilizations previously believed to have existed hundreds of miles further south. This could potentially challenge significant assumptions about pre-Columbian population movements and technological diffusion. The academic language barely disguised the excitement in Dr. Chen's voice. Thomas found himself agreeing to the assessment visit, scheduled for the day after tomorrow, while wondering what exactly he had stumbled into. His desperate search for water had led somewhere entirely unexpected. That evening, Thomas returned to the well with renewed purpose. Now that experts were coming, he wanted to expose more of the stonework to confirm his discovery wasn't some elaborate hoax or misinterpretation. As he carefully cleared away more soil from around the carved blocks, his trowel slipped into what felt like an opening between stones. Directing his headlamp into the gap revealed a small cavity extending beyond the immediate stonework. Carefully widening the opening, Thomas discovered what appeared to be a narrow passage leading horizontally away from the well shaft. The space was too small for him to enter, but he extended his arm into the opening, feeling smooth-worked stone, extending beyond his reach. Whatever he had discovered, it wasn't just a single buried structure. It continued into the earth beneath his property. The implications hit Thomas with physical force, causing him to sit back against the well wall. If this was indeed the work of an ancient civilization, and it extended beyond this single point, what exactly lay beneath his failing farm? And how did it connect to his original purpose, finding water? As if in answer to his unspoken question, Thomas noticed something else. The soil around the newly exposed opening felt different, slightly damp compared to the bone-dry earth elsewhere in the well. It wasn't flowing water, but after months of nothing but dust, even this slight moisture felt significant. Perhaps his father's research about waters flowing beneath the earth wasn't merely frontier mythology after all. Working with renewed energy, Thomas widened the opening further, careful not to damage the ancient stonework. As the gap grew large enough to insert his headlamp, he discovered something that took his breath away. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and his light reflected off what appeared to be a small pool of water gathered on the stone floor. Water. After 9 months of drought, of watching his livelihood wither and die, of being told by every expert that no water remained accessible in the region, here was actual standing water, hidden beneath ancient stonework that no modern geological survey had detected. Thomas's hands trembled as he collected a small sample in a plastic bottle he'd brought for soil samples. The water was clear and cool to the touch. Whether it was safe to drink would require testing, but its mere presence beneath a supposedly depleted water table was revolutionary. Checking the time, Thomas realized he'd been underground for nearly 4 hours. The assessment team would arrive tomorrow afternoon, and he needed to be clear-headed for what promised to be a significant encounter. Reluctantly, he ascended to the surface, carefully securing the well opening against both accident and potential trespassers. The water sample went into his refrigerator, a tangible reminder that what he'd discovered was real, not desperation-induced hallucination. Sleep came easier that night, despite the momentous implications of his find. Physical exhaustion finally overcame mental stimulation, and Thomas drifted off to dreams of flowing water and ancient stone passageways leading to unimaginable discoveries. Morning brought both anticipation and a sudden wave of anxiety. Thomas spent hours clearing the area around the well, making it more accessible for the assessment team. He reviewed his father's journals again, looking for any additional insights that might help interpret what lay beneath his property. The detailed notes took on new significance now. the careful mapping of local legends and geographical anomalies, appearing less like the hobby of an amateur enthusiast and more like the groundwork for a significant discovery. By early afternoon, dust clouds on the horizon announced approaching vehicles. Thomas watched as 3 government SUVs, followed by a university van with Archaeological Field Research Unit emblazoned on its side, made their way up his long driveway. From the lead vehicle emerged a woman in her 50s with a purposeful stride and an air of authority that seemed at odds with her practical field clothes and sun-weathered complexion. "Mr. Reed," she said, extending her hand. "Dr. Lisa Patel, Director of the Federal Archaeological Assessment Division. Thank you for allowing our team access to your discovery. We're eager to see what you've uncovered." As they shook hands, Thomas noticed the team unloading sophisticated equipment from the vehicles, ground-penetrating radar systems, specialized cameras, and what appeared to be laser scanning devices. This was clearly not the perfunctory visit he'd received from county officials. "I appreciate your interest," Thomas replied, gesturing toward the well, "especially given how dismissive local authorities have been about the possibility of finding anything significant beneath this property." Dr. Patel smiled diplomatically. "Different agencies have different priorities, especially during a crisis like this drought. Our division specifically looks for archaeological anomalies that don't fit established patterns. Your discovery, based on the preliminary photos, certainly qualifies." As the team prepared their equipment, another vehicle appeared on the horizon, a sleek black car that seemed ostentatiously clean amid the perpetual dust coating everything in the region. The Westland Properties logo gleamed on the driver's door as it pulled up beside the government vehicles. A tall man in his 40s emerged, his crisp button-down shirt and pressed khakis making him look as out of place on a working farm as a peacock in a chicken coop. His polished appearance was at odds with the practical attire of Dr. Patel's team, who were dressed for dusty fieldwork. "Mr. Reed," he said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Roger Davis, Acquisitions Director for Westland Properties. When we heard about the archaeological interest in your property, we thought we might offer our company's resources to assist with the assessment." Thomas immediately tensed. Westland had been systematically buying up drought-stricken farms throughout the county, their representatives appearing with uncanny timing whenever a farmer reached their breaking point. Their initial offer for his property had come just 2 days after the bank had sent their final warning about his loan payments. "How exactly did you hear about this assessment, Mr. Davis?" Thomas asked, making no effort to hide his suspicion. "I only arranged it yesterday. Our company maintains close relationships with various regulatory agencies," Davis replied smoothly. "We consider it part of our commitment to responsible regional development. Historical preservation is an important aspect of our planning process." Dr. Patel had been observing this exchange with a carefully neutral expression. "Mr. Davis, while we appreciate private sector interest in historical preservation, this is a preliminary federal assessment. Until we determine the nature and significance of Mr. Reed's discovery, outside involvement would be premature." Davis nodded agreeably, though Thomas noticed a flicker of annoyance cross his face. "Of course, Doctor. Westland simply wants to be proactive in supporting significant discoveries. Perhaps I could observe your initial assessment, purely in an informational capacity." Before Dr. Patel could respond, one of her team members approached urgently. "Doctor, we've completed the preliminary ground scan, and you need to see these results immediately." The technician held out a tablet, displaying colorful imaging that meant little to Thomas, but clearly stunned Dr. Patel. Her professional composure slipped momentarily as she studied the screen. "You're certain these readings are accurate? Equipment, Calibration is confirmed. Triple check, Doctor. What we're seeing appears to be an extensive network of constructed chambers and passageways extending well beyond the immediate well site. The architectural complexity is, well, it's unprecedented for this region and time period. Thomas felt a surge of vindication mixed with awe. His father's research, dismissed by so many as fanciful speculation, had led to what was clearly a significant discovery. Roger Davis edged closer, attempting to view the tablet screen, his corporate demeanor giving way to undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Reed," Dr. Patel said, turning to Thomas with newfound respect, "your discovery appears to be far more extensive than we initially anticipated. We'll need to establish a formal assessment perimeter and bring in additional specialized equipment." She glanced significantly at Davis before adding, "This will require a level of confidentiality until we can properly document and secure the site." Davis smiled thinly. Westland Properties fully supports proper archaeological protocols. However, as the potential future steward of this land, we would expect to be kept informed of any findings that might affect development planning. The presumption in his statement that Westland's acquisition of the Reed farm was a foregone conclusion sent a flash of anger through Thomas. Before he could respond, the technical team called for Dr. Patel's attention at the well opening. The lead technician, a young woman with multiple advanced sensors attached to her harness, had descended part-way into the well shaft. "Dr. Patel, we've confirmed Mr. Reed's findings about the masonry construction, but there's something more significant. The passage Mr. Reed partially exposed appears to lead to a substantial chamber approximately 12 feet beyond the well shaft. Our thermal imaging is detecting both air currents and a thermal signature consistent with standing water." Dr. Patel's expression sharpened with interest. "Water? You're detecting actual water?" "Yes, and not just a small amount. The thermal differential suggests a significant body of water with active circulation, potentially indicating a connection to an aquifer or underground water system." The word water sent a ripple of reaction through everyone present. In Clearwater County, after 9 months of devastating drought, water had become almost mythical, discussed with reverence and longing. The possibility of an unknown water source hidden beneath the parched landscape was revolutionary. "I want a full hydrological assessment added to our archaeological survey," Dr. Patel instructed, her tone now urgent. "If there's a functioning water system connected to these structures, its documentation becomes a priority alongside the archaeological findings." Roger Davis stepped forward, his corporate demeanor now fully engaged. A functional water source would significantly impact the property's valuation and potential usage designations. Westland would be very interested in supporting expedited assessment of this resource. Thomas recognized the predatory shift in Davis's approach. What had begun as generic interest in a potential archaeological curiosity had transformed into focused attention on a valuable resource, one that could make Westland's planned developments not just possible, but extremely profitable in a water-starved region. Dr. Patel seemed to recognize this shift as well. "Mr. Davis, I must remind you that any significant water source discovered during our assessment would be subject to federal review under both archaeological preservation statutes and critical resource management regulations. Private development interests would be secondary to public resource considerations, particularly during an officially declared drought emergency." Davis's smile tightened but remained in place. "Of course, Doctor. Westland fully supports responsible resource management. We simply want to ensure our planning accounts for all potential variables." As this exchange continued, the technical team had been busily setting up additional equipment around the well opening. A specialized camera system was being lowered, into the shaft, with live feed displayed on a monitor set up near the well. Dr. Patel, we're ready to proceed with remote visual inspection of the adjacent chamber, called one of the technicians. Thomas moved closer to the monitor, his heart racing. After generations of his family working this land, after his father's seemingly eccentric historical research, after his own desperate gamble to dig deeper when everyone advised against it, he was about to see what actually lay beneath his farm. The camera descended slowly through the well shaft, the image on the monitor showing the now familiar stone lining built by Thomas's ancestors. As it reached the bottom, where Thomas had been digging, the camera operator skillfully maneuvered the equipment toward the opening Thomas had discovered between the ancient masonry blocks. The camera slipped through the opening, and the monitor image shifted dramatically. What appeared on screen caused audible gasps from several team members. The passage opened into a chamber far larger than anyone had anticipated. A perfectly constructed room approximately 30 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling supported by intricately carved stone columns. The floor featured an elaborate mosaic pattern surrounding a central pool of clear water about 15 feet in diameter. The water appeared to be flowing gently, suggesting an active source rather than stagnant collection. Most astonishing were the walls, covered with pristine carvings and what appeared to be a form of pictographic writing, preserved in remarkable condition despite their clearly ancient origin. Several doorways led from this central chamber into additional passages beyond, suggesting this was merely the entrance to a much larger complex. Dr. Patel seemed momentarily at a loss for words. This is unprecedented. The preservation level alone is extraordinary, but the architectural sophistication and artistic elements suggest a civilization with capabilities far beyond what's been documented in this region. This could fundamentally change our understanding of pre-Columbian settlements in North America. Thomas stared at the monitor in disbelief. His desperate search for water had led to something far beyond his imagination. An entire hidden world beneath his failing farm, preserved for centuries while countless generations had lived and worked above, completely unaware. "Can you get a sample of that water?" he asked, the farmer in him still focused on the practical, even amid this archaeological wonder. The technician nodded, manipulating controls to extend a collection device from the camera unit. As they watched, a small vial filled with water from the underground pool. "We'll need comprehensive analysis," Dr. Patel said, "both for scientific documentation and safety assessment. If this water is connected to a previously unknown aquifer, its composition could tell us much about its source and age." Roger Davis had been watching the monitor with calculating intensity, his expression revealing the rapid recalculation of Westland's interest in the Reed property. Thomas recognized the look. He'd seen it before when commodity speculators realized a particular piece of land held more value than initially assessed. "This discovery changes everything," Davis said, dropping the pretense of casual interest. "Westland would like to revise our offer for your property, Mr. Reed. The archaeological significance alone warrants a substantial premium over agricultural valuation." Dr. Patel turned to Davis with barely concealed irritation. "Mr. Davis, this assessment has barely begun. Making commercial offers based on preliminary findings is both premature and inappropriate. Additionally, a discovery of this significance would likely trigger multiple preservation designations that would significantly restrict development options." Davis smiled with practiced confidence. "Doctor, Westland has extensive experience navigating preservation requirements while developing heritage tourism opportunities. A discovery of this magnitude deserves proper exposition, something that requires substantial investment and expertise." Thomas listened to this exchange with growing unease. His original goal, finding water to save his farm, seemed increasingly distant as larger forces converged around his discovery. What had begun as a personal quest was rapidly expanding beyond his control, with both governmental and corporate interests staking claims to what lay beneath his land. As if sensing his discomfort, Dr. Patel addressed Thomas directly. "Mr. Reed, I want to be clear about the implications of what we're seeing. This discovery appears to be of significant national, possibly international, historical importance. The federal assessment process will need to proceed methodically to document and preserve this site properly. Your cooperation will be essential, but I assure you your property rights will be respected throughout this process." Thomas nodded slowly, still processing the magnitude of what was unfolding. "And the water? If there's a significant water source down there, what happens to it?" Dr. Patel's expression softened slightly. "Any water resource would be subject to separate assessment under drought emergency protocols. Given the current regional crisis, if a viable water source is confirmed, it would likely be considered a critical public resource. However," she added, noting Thomas's expression, "as the property owner who discovered it, you would certainly have certain usage rights, particularly for agricultural purposes." This small reassurance provided Thomas with a glimmer of hope that his original goal, saving his farm, might still be achievable amid the archaeological wonder he'd inadvertently uncovered. The technical team continued their remote exploration, the camera venturing further into the underground complex. Each new chamber revealed was more astonishing than the last. Storage rooms with intact ceramic vessels, what appeared to be living quarters with stone furniture, and most significantly, an elaborate water management system featuring channels, filtration chambers, and collection pools. "This isn't just a settlement," said one of the archaeologists, excitement evident in her voice. "This appears to be a specialized facility centered around water management. The engineering is remarkably sophisticated. These channels and filtration systems show an advanced understanding of hydrodynamics that wasn't thought to exist in pre-Columbian North America." As the assessment continued into late afternoon, the team made a discovery that elevated the site's significance even further. The camera located what appeared to be a central control chamber for the water system, a room containing an intricate mechanism of stone counterweights, channels, and valves that could adjust water flow throughout the complex. "It's still operational," the lead technician said incredulously, zooming in on a section where water actively flowed through a series of precisely engineered channels. "After what must be centuries, maybe a millennium, this system is still directing water from an underground source through these chambers." Dr. Patel turned to Thomas, professional detachment giving way to genuine wonder. "Mr. Reed, what you've discovered isn't just an archaeological treasure, it's potentially a technological one as well. This water management system appears to tap into a deep aquifer that modern wells haven't reached, using engineering principles we haven't fully appreciated until now. The people who built this understood something about local hydrogeology that our modern surveys have missed entirely." This revelation hit Thomas with the force of vindication. His father's research, dismissed as amateur enthusiasm for frontier myths, had correctly identified both the existence of a hidden water source and the presence of an ancient civilization that had mastered its use during previous drought periods. What modern science had failed to discover with all its advanced technology, his father had pieced together through careful attention to local knowledge and historical patterns. As the light began to fade and the team was packing up for the day, Thomas noticed Davis on his phone, speaking urgently in a hushed tone. The Westland representative's demeanor had shifted throughout the day, from casual corporate interest to intense focus as the significance of the discovery became clear. Thomas didn't need to hear the conversation to understand that powerful interests were already mobilizing around his accidental find. "We'll return tomorrow with additional specialists," Dr. Patel informed Thomas as equipment was loaded back into vehicles. "This discovery requires expertise across multiple disciplines: archaeology, hydrology, engineering, anthropology. In the meantime, we're implementing preliminary site protection measures." She gestured toward two uniformed officers Thomas hadn't noticed arrive. "These gentlemen will maintain site security overnight. Standard protocol for discoveries of this significance." Thomas nodded, recognizing that his private quest had now become a matter of public interest. As the federal team departed, with Davis trailing behind in his immaculate corporate car, Thomas stood alone at the well opening, gazing down into what had turned from a desperate last resort into a portal to an ancient world. The security officers positioned themselves discreetly near their vehicle at the edge of the property, giving Thomas space while maintaining their vigil. As darkness fell across the drought-parched landscape, Thomas returned to his kitchen, where his father's journals still lay open. He picked up the latest water bill, the one threatening disconnection of his minimal remaining service, and smiled grimly at the irony. While the authorities worried about protecting a historical treasure, his immediate concern remained much the same as it had been when he started digging: water to save his livelihood. That night, as Thomas tried to sleep, his mind raced with implications and possibilities. The discovery beneath his land clearly had significance far beyond his personal situation, potentially offering insights into both ancient civilizations and water management techniques that might benefit the entire region. Yet he couldn't help feeling that control of his own destiny was slipping away as larger forces converged on his property. A noise outside startled him from his thoughts. Looking through the window, Thomas saw headlights approaching along the access road. Not the marked vehicles of the security officers, but something else. He pulled on his boots and stepped onto the porch just as a familiar pickup truck pulled up. His brother James emerged, looking both concerned and somewhat sheepish. "Heard about your discovery," James said without greeting. "News travels fast. The waitress at the diner in town said the government sent out some fancy archaeological team, and Westland's people are in a frenzy." "That pretty much sums it up," Thomas replied, gesturing for his brother to join him on the porch. "Turns out Dad's crazy theories weren't so crazy after all." James nodded slowly, absorbing this validation of their father's research. "So, what happens now? To the farm, I mean." "I wish I knew," Thomas admitted. "It's all happening so fast. This morning I was just a desperate farmer trying to find water. Now I've got federal agents guarding a national treasure under my fields and corporate vultures circling with checkbooks open." "And the water?" "They're saying in town you found some kind of underground river or spring." "Not exactly a river, but yes, there's water down there. Part of some kind of ancient water management system built into these underground chambers. The experts are still trying to figure out exactly what it is, but it seems to tap into a deep aquifer that modern drilling hasn't reached." James let out a low whistle. No wonder Westland's suddenly so interested. Water rights in this county are worth more than gold right now. They sat in silence for a moment, the magnitude of the situation settling between them. Despite their recent disagreements about the farm's future, Thomas felt a familiar connection with his brother. The shared heritage of generations who had worked this land, faced its challenges, and somehow persevered. "I came to apologize," James finally said, "for pushing you to sell. I thought I was being practical, but maybe I gave up too easily. Dad always said this land had secrets worth protecting. Guess he was right in more ways than one." Thomas accepted the apology with a nod, too overwhelmed by the day's events to hold on to resentment. "What would you do," he asked, "if you were in my position now?" James considered the question carefully. "I'd remember what this farm has always been about. not just growing crops, but being stewards of the land. Whatever's down there has been waiting a long time to be discovered. Maybe it was waiting specifically for someone who cared enough about this place to look deeper when everyone else had given up. The sentiment struck Thomas as surprisingly philosophical, coming from his usually pragmatic brother. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Professor Mitchell, sent to both Thomas and Dr. Patel. Preliminary analysis of the pictographic symbols matches elements of the watershed people civilization, long believed to be mythical. If confirmed, this discovery rewrites regional prehistory. Most significantly, their water management techniques were reportedly designed specifically for extended drought periods. We may have discovered not just an archaeological site, but potentially solutions to our current climate crisis. Thomas showed the message to James, whose eyes widened as he read. The watershed people. Dad used to talk about them. I always thought they were just stories. Apparently not, Thomas replied, a new sense of purpose crystallizing within him. And if their water management system still works after all this time, it could save not just our farm, but the whole region, James finished the thought. As they sat together on the porch under a star-filled sky, the security officers maintaining their quiet vigil near the well, Thomas felt a profound connection to both his recent ancestors who had farmed this land and the much more distant ones who had built an entire civilization beneath it. Both had faced the challenge of survival in an unforgiving climate, and both had found innovative ways to persist against overwhelming odds. Tomorrow would bring new complications. Federal authorities expanding their investigation, corporate interests maneuvering for control, and the continuing practical reality of a farm teetering on financial collapse. But tonight, Thomas Reed had found something he'd been missing during the long drought months, hope flowing from an unexpected source deep beneath the parched earth of his family's land. Thomas awoke before dawn, the morning after the federal team's initial assessment, his mind racing with implications of what lay beneath his failing farm. Sleep had come in fitful bursts, dreams of flowing water and ancient stone passageways intermingling with anxiety about corporate vultures and government bureaucracy. The water sample he'd collected sat on his kitchen counter, physical proof that his desperate gamble hadn't been madness after all. He made coffee and stepped onto the porch just as first light crept across the drought-parched landscape. The security officers posted overnight nodded respectfully from their position. Near the well site, their presence confirmed that yesterday's discoveries weren't simply an elaborate hallucination born from desperation. To his surprise, Dr. Patel was already on site, examining data on a tablet while technicians prepared additional equipment near the well opening. She looked up as Thomas approached, fatigue evident beneath her professional demeanor. "You're here, early," Thomas observed, offering her coffee from the thermos he'd brought. She accepted gratefully. Never left, actually. The initial scans showed such remarkable complexity that we continued mapping throughout the night. She turned her tablet toward him, displaying a three-dimensional rendering of what appeared to be an extensive network of chambers and passages extending deep beneath his property. This is preliminary, of course, but we've already identified what appear to be distinct zones: residential areas, storage chambers, water management facilities, and possibly ceremonial spaces. Thomas studied the rendering with growing amazement. All of this has been under my family's farm for generations. How could modern surveys have missed something this extensive? The depth is part of it, Dr. Patel explained. Most geological surveys focus on the first few hundred feet, where typical aquifers and mineral deposits are found. But there's also evidence of deliberate concealment. The chambers appear to have been specifically designed to avoid detection from the surface. They were hiding, Thomas realized, Precisely. Based on the architectural style and preliminary analysis of materials, we're looking at a civilization that existed here approximately 900 to 100 years ago, coinciding with a documented mega-drought period in this region. Instead of abandoning the area like most archaeologists assumed, they adapted by creating this underground complex centered around water access and management. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several vehicles, raising dust, clouds visible against the sunrise. Thomas recognized James's pickup leading what appeared to be a small convoy of university-marked vans and a state government SUV. Reinforcements, Dr. Patel noted. I called in specialists overnight, hydrologists, structural engineers, cultural anthropologists. A discovery of this magnitude requires interdisciplinary expertise. James approached first, looking slightly overwhelmed by the expanded activity since his visit last night. "Got your message," he said to Thomas. "Brought Professor Mitchell like you asked. She was already on her way with colleagues when I reached her." Sarah Mitchell emerged from one of the university vans, accompanied by an elderly man Thomas didn't recognize. She hurried toward them with barely contained excitement. "Thomas, the preliminary images Dr. Patel sent are extraordinary. This is Dr. Esteban Vega from the Indigenous Archaeology Department. He's the leading authority on pre-Columbian water management systems in North America." The elderly man shook Thomas's hand with surprising vigor. "Mr. Reed, your discovery may be the most significant archaeological find in this region in decades. The watershed people have been considered more legend than historical reality until now." "The watershed people?" Thomas asked, the term triggering a memory from his father's journals. "A civilization referenced in both indigenous oral histories and early colonial accounts," Dr. Vega explained. "Said to have developed sophisticated underground living spaces and water management systems during extended drought periods. Mainstream archaeology has largely dismissed them as mythological, given the lack of surface ruins or artifacts. But your discovery suggests they were quite real and remarkably advanced." As the expanded research team organized equipment and established work areas, Thomas pulled James aside. "What's happening with Westland? Any word in town?" James's expression darkened. "They're mobilizing. Sarah from the co-op called this morning. Said Westland representatives were meeting with county commissioners at dawn. Something about water, resource development, and archaeological preservation partnerships. They're positioning themselves to gain control one way or another." Thomas wasn't surprised. Roger Davis's strategic retreat yesterday had clearly been temporary, a pause to regroup rather than a withdrawal. Westland's interest would only intensify as the significance of the discovery became clearer. Dr. Patel approached with an update. "We're ready to proceed with controlled entry to the main chamber. The structural engineers have confirmed it's stable, and we've established proper ventilation and monitoring systems. Would you like to be among the first to enter, Mr. Reed? It seems appropriate, given that you discovered it." The invitation caught Thomas off guard. Despite being the property owner and initial discoverer, he had begun to feel like a spectator to the unfolding scientific investigation. "I'd be honored," he replied, surprised by the emotion welling in his throat. Preparations for the descent took nearly an hour. Thomas was fitted with protective gear, given a safety briefing, and equipped with communication devices. Dr. Patel and Dr. Vega would accompany him, along with a structural engineer and documentation specialist. Standing at the well opening, now professionally reinforced and equipped with a mechanical descent system, Thomas felt a surge of conflicting emotions. His desperate search for water to save his farm had led to something far beyond his imagination, a discovery that might rewrite history, but could also further complicate his already precarious situation. The descent was slow and controlled, passing the familiar stone lining built by Thomas's ancestors before reaching the section where he had broken through into the ancient masonry. Now, properly illuminated and cleared, the craftsmanship of the stonework was even more impressive. Perfectly fitted blocks with intricate carvings that had maintained their integrity for a millennium. When they reached the passage Thomas had partially exposed during his solo exploration, he was astonished by what the research team had uncovered. What had appeared to be a small opening now revealed itself as an elegantly arched entryway, deliberately designed to connect with the natural water collection point of the original well. They integrated their system with the landscape's natural water flow, Dr. Vega observed as they moved through the passage. That's why they chose this specific location. They recognized its hydrological significance. The passage opened into the central chamber Thomas had glimpsed through the remote camera yesterday, but experiencing it in person was entirely different. The space was breathtaking, a perfectly proportioned room with a soaring ceiling supported by columns carved with intricate symbols and figures. The central pool gleamed in the supplied lighting, its water impossibly clear and still, disturbed only by the gentle flow from channels built into the far wall. "This isn't just functional engineering," Dr. Patel said quietly, her scientific detachment momentarily overcome by wonder. "This is art. The precision of these carvings, the mathematical proportions of the space, it reflects a sophisticated cultural aesthetic alongside technical mastery." Dr. Vega moved carefully around the chamber's perimeter, examining the carved symbols with growing excitement. "These pictographs tell a story," he explained, pointing to a sequence of images. Here, a community facing drought, the earth cracked and barren, then spiritual leaders or engineers discovering water deep below. The creation of this underground sanctuary, not as an escape, but as stewardship, maintaining life until the cycles of nature brought rain again. Thomas found himself drawn to the central pool. Despite all the scientific and historical significance surrounding him, his farmer's instinct remained focused on the water itself, the resource he had started digging for in the first place. "Is it safe?" he asked, gesturing toward the pool. "The water, I mean. Could it be used for irrigation?" One of the technicians who had been collecting samples looked up from her instruments. "Preliminary analysis shows it's remarkably pure, filtered through layers of stone and mineral deposits. It contains traces of minerals not typically found in modern groundwater, but nothing harmful. In fact, its mineral profile might be ideal for agriculture." This assessment rekindled Thomas's initial hope. If the water could be safely accessed and utilized, his farm might be saved after all, regardless of the archaeological wonder surrounding it. Dr. Patel seemed to read his thoughts. "Mr. Reed, I understand your primary concern is your farm's survival. I want to assure you that water access rights will be central to any preservation planning. Your discovery has both historical and practical significance, and balancing those aspects will be essential." Their exploration continued beyond the central chamber, revealing a network of living spaces, storage rooms, and what appeared to be communal gathering areas. Each new space reinforced the impression of a highly organized society that had created not just a survival bunker, but a fully realized underground community centered around water management. Most impressive was what Dr. Vega identified as the control chamber, a room containing an intricate system of stone counterweights, channels, and sluice gates that regulated water flow throughout the complex. "This is extraordinary," the structural engineer said, carefully examining the mechanism. "They created a self-regulating system using gravity, water pressure, and counterbalance principles that would be sophisticated even by modern standards, and it's still functional after 1,000 years." Thomas watched as the specialists documented and analyzed each new discovery, feeling increasingly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay beneath his struggling farm. His personal crisis, the drought threatening his livelihood, had led to something of seemingly universal significance, yet he couldn't help wondering how it would ultimately affect his immediate situation. After several hours underground, they returned to the surface, emerging into the harsh midday sun that felt particularly disorienting after the cool, dim beauty of the ancient chambers. The site had transformed dramatically during their exploration. Additional research teams had arrived, media vans lined the road beyond the security perimeter, and a large tent had been erected as a field headquarters. James approached immediately. "You need to see this," he said, leading Thomas toward a group gathered around monitoring equipment near the command tent. "They've been conducting expanded ground scans while you were below. The complex is far larger than initially thought." Dr. Mitchell looked up from the scanning data with astonishment. "Thomas, based on these readings, the underground city extends across approximately 60 acres, well beyond your property boundaries. There appear to be additional chambers beneath neighboring farms, including several that show thermal signatures, consistent with water reservoirs." This revelation shifted Thomas's understanding of his discovery. What he had uncovered wasn't just an isolated structure, but the entrance to an extensive underground network, potentially offering water access to not just his farm, but the entire drought-stricken community. Before he could fully process this implication, a familiar black car appeared on the horizon, Westland Properties returning as expected. This time, Roger Davis wasn't alone. 3 additional vehicles followed, including 1 flying county government flags. "They've brought reinforcements," James muttered, "including Commissioner Walsh." Thomas had dealt with County Commissioner Walsh before, a politician whose policies consistently favored development interests over struggling farmers. His presence alongside Westland representatives confirmed James's morning intelligence. The corporation was mobilizing official channels to assert control. Dr. Patel joined them, having been briefed on the expanded scan results. "This complicates the jurisdiction somewhat," she admitted. "A multi-property archaeological site involves additional regulatory considerations. However, the federal historical preservation statutes should provide temporary protection while a comprehensive assessment is completed." The Westland contingent approached, led by Roger Davis and an older man with the confident bearing of significant wealth and influence. Commissioner Walsh followed, along with several individuals carrying legal briefcases and tablets. "Mr. Reed," Davis called with practiced cordiality, "I'd like to introduce Edward Westland, CEO of Westland Properties. When we reported yesterday's preliminary findings, he was so intrigued, he flew in personally to discuss collaborative possibilities." Thomas wasn't fooled by the friendly overture. Westland's CEO wouldn't appear personally unless significant. Corporate interests were at stake. The discovery had clearly elevated beyond a simple property acquisition target to something warranting executive attention. Dr. Patel, Edward Westland acknowledged the federal archaeologist with a professional nod before turning to Thomas. "Mr. Reed, what you've discovered appears to be of extraordinary significance, both historically and practically. Westland Properties specializes in developing heritage sites while ensuring their preservation. We're prepared to offer a comprehensive partnership package that would address both your financial concerns and the archaeological importance of this discovery." Commissioner Walsh stepped forward. "The county fully supports exploring public-private partnerships that could leverage this discovery for regional benefit. Westland has demonstrated exceptional stewardship with previous historical properties. In our jurisdiction," Thomas noted Dr. Patel's carefully neutral expression, the practiced poker face of a federal official navigating political currents while protecting her scientific mission. "The Federal Archaeological Assessment Division appreciates all stakeholder input, she said diplomatically. However, our immediate priority remains systematic documentation and preservation of this nationally significant site. Edward Westland smiled with the confidence of someone accustomed to navigating bureaucratic obstacles. Of course, Doctor. Westland fully supports thorough scientific assessment. Our interest is in long-term sustainable management once your initial documentation is complete. He turned back to Thomas. Mr. Reed, perhaps we could discuss specific proposals privately. I'm authorized to offer terms that would resolve your current financial challenges while ensuring you maintain a meaningful connection to this discovery. Before Thomas could respond, another vehicle approached. This one bearing federal government markings, different from Dr. Patel's archaeological team. A middle-aged woman emerged, accompanied by two assistants carrying water sampling equipment. Dr. Eleanor Reeves, Federal Drought Response Authority, she introduced herself, approaching the gathered group. When reports of a potentially significant water source crossed my desk this morning, I expedited field assessment. We're facing critical water shortages across 3 states in this region. Any viable new source requires immediate evaluation under emergency protocols. The dynamic shifted yet again with this new arrival. Thomas now found himself at the center of converging interests: archaeological preservation, corporate development, county politics, and federal drought response, all focusing on what he had unearthed beneath his family's land. Doctor. Reeves continued, addressing Thomas directly. Mr. Reed, preliminary data suggests this water system may tap into a deep aquifer unconnected to the drought-depleted sources currently serving this region. If confirmed, this could qualify as a critical resource under federal emergency management statutes. Commissioner Walsh frowned slightly. Water rights in this county fall under state and local jurisdiction, Doctor. Any resource assessment should be coordinated through appropriate channels. Under normal circumstances, Commissioner, you would be correct, Dr. Reeves replied evenly. However, the Presidential Drought Emergency Declaration activated federal oversight protocols for newly discovered water sources of significant volume. My team will work alongside Dr. Patel's archaeological assessment to determine appropriate management approaches. Edward Westland, seasoned in navigating changing political winds, smoothly adjusted his approach. Westland Properties has extensive experience developing water infrastructure that balances private enterprise with public need. We would welcome federal participation in a comprehensive management solution. Thomas listened to this exchange with growing concern. Everyone spoke of management, development, and jurisdiction, institutional interests, claiming authority over what lay beneath his land. Yet none seemed primarily concerned with what had been his initial motivation: saving his farm and the surrounding agricultural community from the devastating drought. As this discussion continued, James nudged Thomas and nodded toward the access road, where another arrival was causing a stir among the security personnel. An elderly pickup truck had pulled up, carrying Frank Mullen, Thomas's neighbor, who had observed his digging efforts days earlier, along with several other local farmers. "Community's getting curious," James murmured, "words spreading about what you've found." Frank approached slowly, his weathered face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Thomas," he called, "folks in town are saying you found some kind of underground water system built by ancient people, that it might still work after all these years." He gestured toward the gathered officials and corporate representatives. "Now, all these important types are showing up. Thought maybe the farmers who've been dying of thirst around here deserve to know what's happening too." Thomas felt a surge of solidarity with his fellow farmers, people who, like him, had watched their livelihoods wither during the extended drought, while experts insisted no water remained accessible and developers circled their failing properties like vultures. "You're right, Frank. Thomas said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This discovery happened because I refused to accept that there was no water left, because I followed my father's research into local knowledge that experts dismissed as folklore. He turned toward the assembled officials and executives. Whatever's down there isn't just an archaeological curiosity or a corporate opportunity. It's a lifeline for this community, knowledge from the past that might save our future. Dr. Patel stepped forward. Mr. Reed is correct about the potential practical applications. The water management system we've discovered appears to access a deep aquifer through ingeniously designed filtration and distribution mechanisms. If properly restored and adapted, it could potentially provide sustainable irrigation for significant acreage, even during extended drought conditions. Frank looked from Thomas to the officials and back again, decades of farmers' pragmatism, evident in his expression. So what's the holdup? If there's water down there and it can save our farms, why aren't we figuring out how to use it? Edward Westland answered smoothly. Complex discoveries require careful management, Mr. Mullen, Frank Mullen, been farming next to the Reeds for 43 years. Mr. Mullen, Westland Properties understands the urgent needs of the agricultural community. That's precisely why we're proposing a structured development approach that would balance historical preservation with practical water access. Our resources could expedite implementation while ensuring proper oversight. Commissioner Walsh nodded in agreement. The county fully supports efficient development that serves community needs while protecting historical assets. Thomas noticed how seamlessly Westland had positioned himself as the solution rather than an opportunist, a corporate savior offering resources and expertise to cut through bureaucratic complications. It was skillfully done, appealing to the desperate farmers' immediate needs while establishing Westland as the necessary facilitator. Before this framing could take hold, Dr. Vega emerged from the access shaft, excitement evident in his expression. Despite his fatigue from hours of underground exploration, we've identified what appears to be the main distribution system, he announced to Dr. Patel, seemingly unaware of the political discussion he was interrupting. The engineering is remarkable. Channels designed to direct water across approximately 200 acres through a gravity-fed system. Some passages extend well beyond Mr. Reed's property, with what appear to be access points strategically positioned throughout neighboring farms. This technical assessment immediately captured the local farmers' attention. Frank stepped forward. You're saying these ancient folks built an irrigation system that covers our farms, and it might still work? Dr. Vega nodded, suddenly registering the expanded audience for his report. Based on our preliminary assessment, yes, the system appears designed to distribute water across what would have been the entire agricultural community of that time, roughly corresponding to the current property boundaries in this valley. The engineering principles are sound, and much of the infrastructure remains intact after a millennium. Thomas seized this opening. So this wasn't built for individual benefit or centralized control. It was designed for community-wide resilience. During drought cycles, exactly what we need now. Dr. Reeves from the Drought Response Authority studied her tablet where initial water analysis was displayed. The volume and quality readings are promising. If the system functions as Dr. Vega suggests, it could potentially sustain significant agricultural activity even under current drought conditions. Edward Westland, ever adaptable, shifted his approach again. A community-wide water resource would require substantial investment to modernize and integrate with current agricultural practices. Westland is uniquely positioned to provide that infrastructure development through a public-private partnership. Thomas recognized the pattern now. Whatever new information emerged, Westland would position his corporation as the essential facilitator, the bridge between ancient resource and modern utilization. Before this narrative could solidify, Thomas decided to reframe the conversation entirely. My father spent years documenting local knowledge about the watershed people and their approach to drought survival, he said, addressing the gathered farmers directly rather than the officials and executives. What we've discovered isn't just an ancient artifact. It's proof that our ancestors understood something about living with this land that modern experts missed entirely. They didn't try to dominate the environment, they adapted to its cycles. Through community cooperation. He turned to Dr. Vega. The water management system wasn't designed for profit or individual control, was it? The archaeologist shook his head. Quite the opposite. The engineering specifically prevents monopolization. Water distribution appears designed for equitable access across the entire agricultural community, with mechanisms that adjust flow based on varying conditions. It's a remarkably sophisticated approach to resource management, focusing on sustainability and shared resilience rather than maximization or centralized control. Thomas nodded, feeling a growing clarity about what needed to happen. Then maybe we should honor that intention. Instead of corporate management or government control, what if we established a community water trust? Farmers working together to restore and maintain this system the way it was originally designed, for the benefit of the entire agricultural community. This suggestion clearly caught Westland and Commissioner Walsh off guard. It represented a path forward that circumvented both corporate acquisition and bureaucratic control, a community-based approach that honored the original engineering principles while addressing current needs. Frank Mullen looked thoughtful. A farmer-run water cooperative could work. We managed shared irrigation systems before the big agricultural companies moved in. No reason we couldn't do it again. Other farmers nodded in agreement. The practical possibility of water access during the devastating drought overriding any skepticism about the unusual source. Dr. Patel considered the proposal with evident interest. From a preservation perspective, maintaining the system's original design principles while adapting it for contemporary use would be ideal. It would allow for both historical documentation and practical implementation. Dr. Reeves added, the Federal Drought Response Authority could potentially provide technical support and emergency funding for community-based water resilience projects, particularly those utilizing sustainable methodologies. Edward Westland's expression remained pleasant, though Thomas detected frustration beneath the corporate veneer. His company's standard approach, acquiring control of valuable resources through financial leverage over struggling property owners, was being challenged by a community-centered alternative. While community involvement is admirable, Westland countered smoothly, restoration and adaptation of ancient infrastructure requires significant capital investment and technical expertise. Westland Properties could provide both, within a framework that ensures community benefits while addressing necessary financial realities. Commissioner Walsh nodded in agreement. The county must consider long-term management viability. Corporate partnership provides stability that informal community arrangements might lack. Thomas recognized the implied message. Without Westland's resources, bureaucratic obstacles would delay or prevent access to the water system. It was a subtle leverage point, using the farmers' desperate need for immediate relief to push them toward corporate dependency. Before Thomas could respond, James stepped forward unexpectedly. There's another option we haven't discussed. He turned to Dr. Patel. If this site has national historical significance, doesn't that qualify it for federal preservation status? Dr. Patel nodded cautiously. Potentially, yes. Discoveries of this magnitude often receive National Historical Landmark designation, which brings both protection protocols and access to preservation resources. James continued, and if the water system is part of that historical significance, if its engineering and function are integral to its historical value, wouldn't preserving it in working condition be part of that protection? Dr. Vega's eyes lit up with understanding. The young man makes an excellent point. This isn't just a static artifact, it's a functioning technological system whose operational principles are central to its historical significance. Preserving it in working condition would be entirely consistent with standard archaeological preservation approaches for ancient engineering achievements. Thomas saw where his brother was heading. So a community water trust could be established as the stewards of a living historical technology, maintaining it in functional condition as part of preserving its cultural significance. Dr. Patel considered this framing carefully. Such an approach would be unusual, but not unprecedented. There are cases where historical irrigation systems or water mills have been preserved in working condition as living museums of functional heritage. But on a much larger scale, James added, a regional agricultural water system preserved as living history, demonstrating sustainable drought adaptation techniques developed a millennium ago, while providing practical benefits to the current community. Edward Westland, recognizing the conversation moving decisively away from corporate control, attempted to realign with this new direction. Westland Properties would of course support such a community heritage project. Our resources could help establish the necessary legal frameworks and infrastructure upgrades. With all due respect, Mr. Westland, Thomas interrupted, I think that's precisely what the watershed people were trying to avoid when they designed this system. They created something that couldn't be controlled by any single authority. Something that ensured everyone had fair access to a crucial resource during crisis periods. He turned to the gathered farmers. We've spent years being told by experts that there was no water left accessible in this region. We've watched corporations buy up failing farms at pennies on the dollar because modern technology couldn't find solutions to our drought. Maybe it's time we look to older wisdom, not just for the water itself, but for how we manage it together. As the discussion continued into the afternoon, with technical experts, officials, corporate representatives, and local farmers all contributing perspectives, Thomas felt a profound connection to both his recent ancestors who had farmed this land and the ancient engineers who had created the marvel beneath it. Both had faced climate challenges that threatened survival, and both had found innovative ways to persist through cooperation rather than competition. The path forward remained uncertain, with complex legal, technical, and financial questions to resolve. But standing at the well opening as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Thomas Reed felt something he hadn't experienced in many months. Hope, flowing from an unexpected source deep beneath the parched earth of his family's land, ancient wisdom unearthed just when modern approaches had reached their limits. 6 months after Thomas Reed's desperate dig into the abandoned well, Clearwater County had transformed. The autumn air carried a crisp freshness as Thomas stood at the edge of his thriving fields, watching the first harvest since the discovery being gathered by a collaborative team of local farmers and university agricultural students. The vibrant, green crop stood in stark contrast to the memory of parched, lifeless soil that had dominated the landscape when his journey began. The elegant stone structure now enclosing the well entrance had become both a practical access point and a symbolic monument to what lay beneath. Designed by architects specializing in historical integration, it harmonized ancient engineering principles with modern functionality, much like the revitalized water system itself. Dr. Eleanor Singh, who had replaced Dr. Patel as the lead archaeological coordinator 2 months into the project, approached with tablet in hand. The eastern distribution channels are now fully mapped and restored, she reported. The engineering team is consistently amazed by how little modification the original systems required. These builders genuinely understood long-term sustainability. Thomas nodded, still sometimes struggling to comprehend the scope of what his desperate search for water had uncovered. The watershed people's underground city now extended far beyond initial estimates, a complex of nearly 80 acres featuring sophisticated living spaces, ceremonial chambers, food storage facilities, and most significantly, the revolutionary water management system that had transformed the region's agricultural prospects. The filtration efficiency rates are holding steady at 95%. Dr. Singh continued, scrolling through technical data. Modern systems typically achieve 85% at best. We're still analyzing exactly how they achieve this, using only natural materials and gravity-fed mechanisms. The practical benefits of the discovery had materialized faster than anyone anticipated. Once the initial assessment confirmed both the archaeological significance and the functional viability of the water system, an unprecedented coalition had formed. The Clearwater Agricultural Heritage Trust, a unique entity combining historical preservation, indigenous cultural stewardship, and practical agricultural water management, had been established with Thomas as its principal coordinator. What Westland Properties had attempted to control through corporate acquisition had instead become a community-managed resource with federal protection. Edward Westland's final attempt to assert influence, offering to fund the entire restoration project in exchange for naming rights and majority representation on the management board, had been politely declined. Instead, emergency drought relief funds, historical preservation grants, and community contributions had financed the careful restoration of the ancient system. Most remarkably, the underground aquifer, tapped by the watershed people's engineering, continued to provide steady water flow despite the ongoing regional drought. Hydrologists had confirmed what the ancient builders somehow already knew, that this deep water source, replenished through a geological pathway completely separate from the depleted modern aquifers that conventional wells had accessed. The graduate researchers would like to show you their latest findings, Dr. Singh said, gesturing toward the research center established in Thomas's renovated barn. They've made progress translating more of the pictographic inscriptions from the ceremonial chamber. As they walked toward the research center, Thomas noticed a tour group being guided around the educational exhibits that had been installed near the well house. Tourism had become an unexpected economic boost for the struggling agricultural community, with visitors from across the country coming to see the remarkable underground city and its revolutionary water system. Inside the research center, a team of graduate students from 3 universities had created a digital reconstruction of the most elaborately decorated chamber in the underground complex. Professor Mitchell, now the lead cultural anthropologist for the project, greeted Thomas warmly. "Thomas! Perfect timing! Maya has made a breakthrough with the sequential narrative panels in the eastern section." A young woman stepped forward, her enthusiasm palpable. "Mr. Reed, we've confirmed that the pictographs tell the story of how the watershed people developed their underground adaptation. It wasn't a sudden decision, but an intentional, multi-generational response to changing climate patterns. She manipulated the digital model to highlight specific sections of carved imagery. This sequence shows how they observed rainfall patterns decreasing over several human lifetimes. Rather than abandoning the region or continuing surface practices until crisis forced their hand, they began gradual underground development while conditions were still manageable. Planned resilience rather than emergency response, Thomas observed, seeing parallels to his father's forward-thinking research that had made this discovery possible. "Exactly," Maya continued. And this section here documents how they identified the deep aquifer. Their understanding of geology was remarkable. They recognized subtle surface indicators that revealed water movement patterns far below what was visibly apparent. Thomas thought about the modern geological surveys that had completely missed this water source. The experts who had confidently declared nothing accessible remained beneath his farm. Somehow, using only careful observation and generational knowledge, the watershed people had identified what modern technology had overlooked. "There's something else," Professor Mitchell added, directing Thomas's attention to another section of the digital model. This narrative sequence appears to document a deliberate decision to conceal their underground development from outside groups, not out of fear, but to protect the water source from overexploitation. They weren't just adapting to drought, Maya elaborated. They were creating a sustainable approach that could function indefinitely. Their engineering wasn't designed for maximum extraction, but for optimal balance, taking only what the system could naturally replenish. Thomas recognized this philosophy as diametrically opposed to modern resource management approaches that typically maximized short-term extraction until depletion forced change. The watershed people had deliberately chosen a different path, one that prioritized long-term sustainability over immediate abundance. Their discussion was interrupted by James's arrival. Since the discovery, Thomas's brother had returned to the family business, helping manage the farm while Thomas coordinated the broader project. Their relationship had deepened through the shared purpose of honoring their father's research while securing the farm's future. County commissioners. "Here," James said, his expression suggesting mixed news. "Along with representatives from 3 neighboring counties, they're talking about regional expansion of the water trust model." Thomas followed his brother outside, where a group of officials had gathered near one of the monitoring stations that tracked water flow through the restored channels. Commissioner Walsh, once aligned with Westland's development interests, had undergone a political evolution as the community benefits of the water trust became undeniable. "Thomas," the commissioner greeted him with newly practiced familiarity. "These gentlemen are from Adams, Franklin, and Riverdale counties. They're interested in how our water management approach might be implementable in their jurisdictions." Thomas recognized the political opportunity the commissioner was seizing, positioning himself as the visionary who had supported this revolutionary water management approach. It represented a remarkable reversal from his initial advocacy for Westland's corporate acquisition strategy. "We're seeing agricultural productivity increases of 40% compared to pre-drought levels," Walsh continued, citing statistics that had transformed public perception of the project. "Using water management principles developed a millennium ago, adapted for modern implementation." The visiting officials asked questions about governance structure, funding mechanisms, and technical implementation, all the practical aspects of replicating Clearwater County's success. Thomas provided straightforward answers while noting the essential philosophical foundation. "The technical aspects are important," he emphasized, "but what makes this work is the underlying approach. The watershed people designed for community resilience, not individual profit or centralized control. Their system intentionally prevents any single entity from dominating access. This principle had been formalized in the Trust's charter. No individual corporation or government entity could control more than 15% of decision-making authority or water allocation. Management decisions required supermajority consensus among representatives from agricultural, indigenous, scientific, and community stakeholder groups. As the official discussion continued, Thomas noticed a familiar black car approaching along the access road. Roger Davis emerged, now representing not Westland Properties, but a new entity called Sustainable Heritage Partners, a consultancy formed after Westland's failed acquisition strategy had prompted a corporate pivot toward the growing heritage water management sector. "Mr. Reed," Davis greeted Thomas with his practiced corporate smile, now tempered by the humility of having been outmaneuvered months earlier. "I was giving our clients a tour of successful community water management implementations. Your project remains the gold standard in the field." Thomas maintained polite professionalism. Davis had adapted to the new reality with characteristic corporate flexibility, repositioning himself as an advocate for the very approach he had initially attempted to prevent. "Your clients are welcome to observe the public educational exhibits. The underground chambers remain restricted to scheduled research and cultural heritage visits." Davis nodded acknowledgement of these boundaries. "Of course, we are merely interested in the governance model and technical implementation principles. Several drought-affected regions in other states are considering similar approaches." As Davis led his clients toward the public exhibition area, James muttered under his breath, "Amazing how quickly corporate interests discover the value of traditional knowledge once it proves profitable." Thomas couldn't disagree, but he recognized a deeper victory in this corporate adaptation. The principles his father had documented, the ancient wisdom the watershed people had encoded in their remarkable engineering, were spreading beyond Clearwater County, influencing water management approaches across drought-affected regions. Whether driven by genuine appreciation or opportunistic profit-seeking, the knowledge was flowing outward, potentially benefiting communities far beyond their immediate region. The afternoon brought another significant visitor, Dr. Harold Thompson, from the Federal Water Resilience Initiative, a newly established agency focusing on climate adaptation strategies for agricultural regions. His arrival signaled Washington's growing interest in what had begun as one farmer's desperate dig for water. "Mr. Reed," Dr. Thompson greeted him with genuine respect. "I've reviewed the comprehensive data from your water management system. The White House Climate Adaptation Task Force is particularly interested in how ancient engineering principles might be integrated into our national drought resilience strategy." This federal attention represented yet another expansion of the project's influence. What had started as Thomas's personal quest to save his family farm had grown into a county-wide water trust, then a regional model, and now potentially a component of national climate adaptation policy. Dr. Thompson continued, "The integration of indigenous knowledge with modern implementation is particularly compelling. Traditional ecological approaches have been systematically undervalued in conventional resource management frameworks." Thomas thought of his father's marginalized research, the local knowledge dismissed as folklore by scientific authorities. The experts who had confidently declared no water remained accessible. "Sometimes wisdom has to wait for conditions to make it relevant again," he observed. "The watershed people understood drought cycles and planned for them. We forgot that knowledge until crisis forced us to rediscover it." Dr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "There's growing recognition that climate resilience requires diverse knowledge systems, not just modern science, but traditional ecological knowledge that spans generations of direct observation and adaptation." Their conversation continued as they walked the property, observing how the ancient water distribution channels had been carefully restored and integrated with modern agricultural methods. The fields that had lain barren 6 months ago now flourished, with drought-resistant crop varieties selected through collaborative research between agricultural scientists and indigenous knowledge keepers. As evening approached, Thomas found himself momentarily alone at the well house, the access point, where his desperate dig had broken through into a world forgotten by modern society, but preserved in both physical form and cultural memory. He ran his hand along the stone archway that had been uncovered and restored, marveling at how craftsmanship from a millennium ago maintained its integrity and beauty. From this vantage point, he could see the full scope of transformation his discovery had initiated. The research center hummed with activity as scholars from multiple disciplines documented and analyzed the underground city. The fields flourished with crops, nourished by water flowing through ancient channels. The community that had faced economic collapse due to drought now hosted visitors, researchers, and officials studying their revolutionary water management approach. Most significantly, the farm that had been weeks away from foreclosure when he began digging was now not only financially secure, but serving a purpose far beyond agricultural production. The Reed family farm had become both a working demonstration of climate-resilient agriculture and the surface steward of an archaeological wonder that was changing how people thought about adaptation to environmental challenges. Sarah Mitchell found him there as sunset painted the landscape in warm hues. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, joining him at the well house entrance. "Just reflecting on how differently things might have turned out," Thomas replied, "if Westland had succeeded in acquiring the farm, if the federal assessment had prioritized preservation over functional restoration, if the community hadn't rallied around the water trust concept, or if you'd accepted conventional wisdom that there was no water to be found," Sarah added. "Your stubbornness made all the difference." Thomas smiled at this characterization. Dad called it justified skepticism of expert certainty. He always said the most dangerous words in agriculture were, "It can't be done that way." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group Thomas had been expecting. Representatives from the coalition of watershed tribal nations, indigenous communities whose oral histories had preserved knowledge of the underground city and its builders when conventional archaeology had dismissed them as mythological. Maria Blackhorn, the coalition's cultural heritage director, approached with formal dignity. "The Council of Elders has completed their deliberation regarding the ceremonial calendar found in the Eastern Chamber. They've authorized me to share their interpretation with your research team." This collaboration represented another revolutionary aspect of the project. Rather than treating indigenous knowledge as secondary to academic expertise, the Clearwater Heritage Trust had established equal standing between traditional knowledge keepers and conventional scientists. The resulting integration had accelerated understanding of both the technical and cultural dimensions of the underground city. The calendar indicates that the watershed people designed their water management system around a 200-year drought cycle, Maria explained. Their oral histories documented climate patterns over millennia, allowing them to develop adaptation strategies beyond a single human lifespan. Thomas considered the profound implications of this long-term thinking. Modern resource management rarely planned beyond quarterly profits or election cycles, while these ancient engineers had designed systems to function across multiple generations. "We've identified similar long-cycle planning in the structural engineering," added Dr. Singh, who had joined the conversation. "The support systems for the main chambers include what appear to be scheduled maintenance indicators, markers that would become visible only when specific maintenance was required, some designed to appear only after 50 or 100 years. As darkness fell, lights illuminated the well house and the surrounding research area, creating an island of activity against the rural night. The day's visitors had mostly departed, leaving the core team to continue their work. Thomas found himself drawn back to the underground chambers, not for scientific observation, but for personal reflection. With proper safety protocols established, limited access to the main chambers was now routine for authorized personnel. Thomas descended the reinforced stairway that had replaced his original makeshift rope system, moving through the passage. that connected his ancestors' well to the ancient underground city. The central chamber remained the most awe-inspiring space, its perfectly proportioned architecture and intricate carvings now carefully illuminated to highlight their beauty, while minimizing potential damage. The central pool reflected the lights, its water still flowing clean and clear through the millennium-old filtration system. Thomas sat on a stone bench near the pool, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water. He often came here when decisions weighed heavily or when he needed perspective beyond the day's immediate concerns. Something about this space, created by people who had faced similar environmental challenges but approached them with a fundamentally different philosophy, helped clarify his thinking. "I thought I might find you here," said a voice from the chamber entrance. James entered, having followed his brother below ground. "Council meeting tomorrow about the regional expansion proposal. Thought you might want to review the impact assessments." Thomas accepted the tablet James offered, scanning the detailed analysis of how expanded implementation of the water management principles might affect the broader watershed. The Clearwater Heritage Trust had established strict sustainability parameters. Any expansion had to maintain hydrological balance, ensuring extraction never exceeded natural replenishment rates. "Looks viable," Thomas observed after reviewing the key metrics, "as long as we maintain the distributed governance model." "That's non-negotiable." James nodded in agreement. "The visiting counties are pushing for more centralized authority, easier for them administratively, but that undermines the entire philosophy." "Exactly what the original designers were preventing," Thomas replied, gesturing towards specific carvings that Dr. Vega had translated months earlier. "These symbols represent their governance principles, distributed authority, consensus requirements for major decisions, protection against concentrated control." Their conversation echoed in the ancient chamber, a modern discussion of governance and resource management taking place in a space designed by people who had confronted similar challenges centuries earlier. The continuity struck Thomas as both humbling and hopeful. Human societies repeatedly facing environmental pressures, sometimes finding sustainable paths forward, sometimes not. "Dad would be amazed by all this," James said, after a thoughtful silence. His research vindicated beyond anything he could have imagined. Thomas nodded, feeling his father's presence particularly strongly in this place. "He always said the answers were here if we looked in the right places." He meant it metaphorically, looking to traditional knowledge rather than just modern technology. He never suspected how literally right he was. As they prepared to return to the surface, Thomas paused for a final moment beside the central pool. The water's surface reflected both the ancient ceiling above and their modern figures, a fitting visual metaphor for the project itself, which bridged past and present, traditional wisdom and contemporary implementation. The brothers emerged from underground to find the night sky brilliantly clear, stars visible in the rural darkness with extraordinary clarity. Near the horizon, clouds gathered, actual rain clouds according to the morning's forecast. The regional drought persisted, but meteorologists had noted changing patterns, with increased precipitation beginning to return to the historical norm. Whether coincidental timing or cosmic acknowledgement, the rain's potential return as ancient water wisdom resurfaced seemed fitting. Nature's cycles continued regardless of human understanding or misunderstanding, but communities that aligned with these patterns, rather than fighting against them, stood a better chance of long-term resilience. Thomas's gaze moved from the distant clouds to his flourishing fields, then to the wellhouse that connected surface and underground worlds. His desperate act, digging deeper when all hope seemed lost, had revealed not just water, but wisdom. Not just an archaeological wonder, but a practical path forward. The next morning dawned with the promised rain, a gentle, soaking precipitation that farmers throughout the county welcomed with profound gratitude. Thomas watched from his porch as droplets accumulated on leaves and soaked into soil, supplementing the underground system that had sustained them through the worst of the drought. The day's agenda included multiple meetings, regional officials discussing expansion proposals, research teams presenting new findings, agricultural specialists analyzing crop performance data. The Clearwater Heritage Trust had grown far beyond Thomas's initial vision of simply finding water to save his farm. Yet as complex as the project had become, its fundamental purpose remained simple: honoring knowledge that connected human communities with natural systems in sustainable relationship. Whether preserved in ancient engineering, indigenous oral traditions, or a farmer's stubborn refusal to accept experts' limitations, this wisdom had proven its enduring value. Thomas Reed had sought only water when he broke through his grandfather's concrete well cap against all expert advice. What he'd found instead was something far more valuable: a connection across time to people who had faced similar challenges and overcome them through ingenuity, cooperation, and profound respect for the delicate balance between human innovation and natural systems. As he prepared to meet the day's responsibilities, Thomas took a moment to touch the worn leather cover of his father's journal, the document that had guided him when modern expertise had failed. Inside, his father's careful documentation of dismissed folklore had preserved the clues that led to this remarkable discovery, connecting generations of knowledge seekers across time. The drought continued across much of the region, but here, at the epicenter of an ancient civilization's greatest achievement, the fields remained green, not through domination of nature, but through partnership with insights buried and forgotten, waiting centuries for someone stubborn enough to dig just a little deeper. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.